This is Dan Schneider. On this Dan Schneider video interview, the subject is Life Take Two. It's a YouTube channel by Jennie Gage, and the conversation will begin in a moment. Jennie Gage is my guest. She has led an interesting life. She has led multiple lives online. She was born and raised as a Mormon, I believe. She also was a member of well, I don't know if we call it a member, but she was a MAGA supporter for many years. In the last couple of years, though, she has turned to a more liberal and or progressive view. She continues to have a channel. She gets lots of views. I want to thank you because there's sort of this unspoken thing with a lot of YouTubers that if you get 100,000 plus views per video, pikers like me that only got a couple of hundred, there's this sort of like, well, we're not going to deal with the pauper stuff. So I appreciate you for taking the time to speak about your life and your endeavors. So let me just begin. As I said, you were born and raised a Mormon, correct?
Correct.
Can you tell me a little bit about that?
Can I just start by saying thanks for having me on today,
Sure.
Dan? I've only dealt with you in emails, and your voice on the microphone is so beautiful. I'm a little bit jealous.
Oh, really?
So, yeah, I'm
Most
so
people
happy to
like
have
that.
this.
Oh.
No, your voice is so cool. It's so distinctive, and I'm really happy to talk to you today. I do get so many requests for interviews, and I do have to turn down 99% of everything. But the things that you're doing in the world really intrigued me. So I said yes right off the bat. So I'm really happy to be here today, and I'm honored to have this conversation with you. And yes, I was, for better or worse, born into the middle of the Mormon church, and not just any old Mormon church, but the Mormon church of the 1970s, which was still blatantly racist. Black people couldn't go through the temple to get married for time and all eternity. There was no black leadership. Blatantly sexist. At the time of my childhood, the prophet was fighting women's lib hook and nail, and they were doing everything that they could to keep women in their place in the homes, and also obviously before the internet. So growing up in Mormonism in absolute isolation in the middle of a huge Mormon family where I didn't have a lot of outside influence, I had a very distinctively different life than a lot of my other friends growing up in the 70s and 80s.
So you have described, at least in a few videos that I've seen, life as a Mormon as being in a cult. And now you have gotten out of that. You also, if we want to call MAGA a political cult, you've gotten out of a second cult. I guess my first question is, having seen you, you've said that despite your looks, you are in your early 50s. And how did you twice fall into culted? The Mormon stuff, I guess I could understand. You were born into it. You have your uncles, your aunts, your nuclear family. Everyone's into it. But how did you fall into the MAGA clutches?
Super simple answer, but I'll expand on it. Short answer is childhood indoctrination and very meticulous grooming. I don't just call the Mormon Church a cult for kicks and giggles or clickbait or anything like that. By all definitions, it is a cult. And I know that a lot of people, when they hear the word cult, they picture things like Jonestown and, people moving to an island or out in the middle
Children
of
at
this.
daycare centers being abused for Satan.
Yeah,
Loving.
things like that with a lot of isolation, usually like these little enclaves of community that are completely separated from the outside world. So to the outside observer, some people would see Mormonism and see, well, I have neighbors that are Mormon. Mormons live not just in Utah, but Arizona, California, Alaska, Florida, China, Zimbabwe. Mormons live all over the world. There's a growing number of members outside of the United States. So while it started off as a very cloistered cult in New York and then Missouri and Illinois and eventually Utah and Idaho and Arizona, today, and in my childhood, we lived everywhere. But I call it a cult without walls. It does, by definition, fit to the letter everything about a cult, with the control, with the divine leader, with lack of access to information. And for me, like, Dan, I don't know if you know this. I think you do because you've studied Mormonism a bit. But even my underwear was controlled. I couldn't, as a 21-year-old newlywed, just drive down the street to Victoria's Secret. Sorry, you didn't know we were going to talk about panties, but but I couldn't. I couldn't just go down and like buy myself some undies at Victoria's Secret. I had to drive to the church distribution center and pay money to receive my Mormon garments. So I like to call the Mormon Church a cult without walls, because you are everywhere, but that fence is inside your mind. And that fence happened to be built for me during my childhood, when I was groomed and indoctrinated to have those things that make cults distinctive. So, of course, the divine leader, the instruction that comes from others, where I'm just supposed to follow, the information control, the behavioral control, the thought control, even who I married, how many babies I had, what I did with my own private parts was controlled by my cult. And when you're programmed like that, I have a little allegory for the cult babies. It's like back in the 80s when we had boom boxes, right? And you might have this beautiful boom box and you could put your Depeche Mode CD in there and dance out to Depeche Mode. But you could take that CD out and you could slip in a little bit of Guns N' Roses. You could slide in some Ozzy Osbourne. Once you have that boom box, the sky's the limit. You can have a dance party in your bedroom all night long. Because I had so carefully been groomed to behave a certain way within the Mormon Church, that then made me susceptible to not just two cults. Like, I have been a part of so many different subcults in my lifetime, just because of that childhood indoctrination and the programming. I was really susceptible, especially to charismatic leaders, really susceptible to people who wanted to tell me exactly what to do, where I didn't have to make my own decisions, really susceptible to any type of individual or institution that promised me amazing things. Like the Mormon Church promised me eternal life as a goddess. So if a multi-level marketing business came along and promised me millions, there's charismatic leader and all the stuff, then I was on board. And because of that childhood indoctrination and that religious programming throughout my whole entire early developmental years, when Donald Trump hit the stage in my TV as this big charismatic leader and promised that he was going to make America great again, I signed up.
So let me just back up a second to the Mormons again. And I know I recently did actually a couple of shows on this Christian television show when I was a kid called Davy and Goliath. I don't know if you ever saw that out in Utah, but it was.
I don't know that I did. Huh?
Yeah, it was about this boy and his dog. It was puppets, sort of like Gumby, if you know what that is. And
yeah.
I talked with a fellow who was a pastor in the church, and when I was a kid, and I remember I had a 7-year Sunday school pin, and I would argue the hell out of my pastor to the point where he's like, "Oh, that kid, he just keeps asking me questions. I can't answer him, you know." And what would a child like me, or if you were that child asking questions about, well, why is Joseph Smith this? Why was Brigham Young that? Why was blah, blah, blah? Would you have just sort of been, maybe not physically, but sort of psychologically backhanded and said, just shut up and accept it? Or?
Oh, cults are masterful at gaslighting, aren't they? Gaslighting and just shushing you. So one of my earliest memories of just that very thing happening to me was as I was getting ready to be baptized. Mormon kids are baptized when they're 8 years old. And so that year in Sunday school, they teach you all of the doctrines of the Mormon gospel. As a really little kid, I was just learning things like Adam and Eve and Heavenly Father and how to pray and, you know, Noah's Ark and things like that. But to prepare you for your baptism at age 8, that whole year you learn about the restoration of the gospel. You learn about Joseph Smith. You learn about the Book of Mormon. You learn about the afterlife and all of the concepts around that, and kind of prepping you for your eventual temple marriage, which for me, when I turned 8, this is kind of profound on my life timeline, I would be engaged 2 weeks after I turned 18. I would meet my first fiance at age 17 when I went to college. So that little 8-year-old that was getting baptized within just 10 years would be wearing a diamond ring and getting ready to be married and become a trad wife for the first time. So anyway, they prepare you for that. And I'm high IQ. I'm a fairly good critical thinker, but the Mormon Church had to beat that out of me. So in that little Sunday school class, I remember one Sunday my teacher teaching us about the golden plates that Joseph Smith had received from an angel and how that he had translated them into the Book of Mormon. And I have a Book of Mormon here that I keep on my desk. My Sunday school teacher, I remember with tears in her eyes, I wrote all about this in my diary. She holds up the Book of Mormon to the whole class of little 7-year-olds. And she says, and this is the golden plates that the angel gave to Joseph Smith. They've been translated and we can read this today. And I'm like, but that's not the actual golden plates. That's, that's a book. Mine was printed at the time in like 1982. So like, that's not the actual golden plates. So I raised my hand in class and I'm like, so where are the actual golden plates that the angel gave? Like, are they in a museum? Are they here in the church? Where's the golden plates? And my Sunday school teacher is just like, oh, well, okay. I mean, we don't have the golden plates. They don't exist. There are no golden plates. So she bore her testimony to me about how that an angel had come back and taken the golden plates back to heaven. And even as a 7-year-old, almost 8-year-old child, it just didn't stack up for me. Like, if God really wanted us to have this truth and the whole world to have it, he would have left the golden plates as proof so that everybody would follow the church. And so I went home that day and told my mom and dad, it's like, it just doesn't make sense, like we should have the golden plates. This seems a little bit crooked to me. And my mom crying and my dad getting a kick out of it. There's always an answer to everything, right? Like if you're doing something shady, you've thought in advance of how to counter argue that shady thing. So Joseph Smith, as he's creating the church, well, he already has that. The angel took the plates back. He told me that nobody could see the plates. And honestly, like that's a lot of all religion.
Now, one of the things that I found interesting too, through your videos, is you were also very much a white nationalist. You were a white supremacist in view. You may not have been a Ku Klux Klan or out there saying, hang the black folks or burn the Jews or whatever thing, but I would assume that, like you said this was stuff beaten out of you because in my experience growing up in New York, a much more culturally diverse place than you probably grew up,
more culturally diverse
yeah.
than white, Mormon, Arizona, and Utah.
Yeah. But if I saw a pretty Puerto Rican girl, a sexy black woman walking down the block, man, I'd be turning my head, like that, to me, that's just natural. There's an old saying where I grew up that it doesn't matter the color of the skin, just matters what shape it's in. Now that's looksist, but it's not racist. But
I've never heard that, Dan.
Yeah. Well, but so it seems to me, what were non-white, non-Christians portrayed as? Were Jews the evil seducers of children like Hansel and Gretel? Were blacks just vicious animals? Were Native Americans? I guess Native Americans might have been the one group you were closer to out there in Utah. What kind of stuff were you fed about non-us?
Yeah, they were the evildoers. They're the sinners. They were the followers of Satan. I know of no other, like outside of Hitler's youth, right? Like Hitler did a really good job of indoctrinating children. I know of very few white supremacist organizations that have children's songs, children's scriptures, and actual printed, copyrighted material to indoctrinate children into white supremacy. And the Mormon Church does. So for starters, the Mormon Church was founded foundationally as a white supremacist organization. And the root of that is the Book of Mormon. Joseph Smith, he was born in the late 1700s, early 1800s, and the Book of Mormon came out in the 1830s. Joseph Smith said that it was revelation, that this came straight from God. These ancient scriptures were translated so that the Americans of today could have them. And in the very first few chapters, what he's trying to do is to explain why the Indians around him, right, the First Nations people that lived around him in Palmyra, New York, were dark-skinned. Of course, at the time, there were so many different theories. We didn't have the archaeological, the historical, the genetic understanding that we do today. So there are all kinds of people just kind of
thought of as the lost tribe of Israel, though?
Yep, lost tribes of Israel. Absolutely, yep. But not only were they lost tribes of Israel, they were lost tribes of Israel who came over to America, and because they were so wicked and evil, God curses them with brown skin. And it says that right in the Book of Mormon. It says, Laman and Lemuel, because they were such terrible human beings, they sinned against God. They're cursed with skins of blackness, and they're no longer white and delightsome. And specifically, they're cursed so that they won't be enticing unto the white people. So I grew up from the time I was 3 years old. We had these little children's illustrated scriptures that my mommy would read to me at night. And they have the white Nephites, who are the good people that follow God in the Book of Mormon. And they have the Indians, the brown-skinned Lamanites, and they are cursed. And we had primary songs about it. We literally, as a 4-year-old, I would go to church on Sunday and we would sing songs about the wicked, dark-skinned people. And I think the important bit about white supremacy is that supremacy, that superiority. Not only did I learn to look down on and fear and hate and feel sorry for those people, like when the Ethiopian famines happened, when I was in like kindergarten and first grade, I remember mentioning to my grandma, like, what if we send some money over there? Because there were TV commercials and stuff. You can send money to Ethiopia. And my grandma, like, Africa is its own problem, and that, they're cursed. The curse of Cain. They were brown skinned. And that enabled me as a young child to actually stifle empathy and no longer feel sorry for those people. Like, oh, well, yeah, I don't feel sorry for them. They're cursed. They're evil. They're satanic. They're the wicked people. So this is just God's judgment. So there's that one aspect of that white supremacy, the looking down on others. But the other part is the superiority. And that felt really good, Dan. Like I grew up with, because you're blonde-haired, blue-eyed, white, born in the gospel, you are literally God's elect, his chosen child. We had all of these songs around that too. I'm a high school kid singing about, I have been saved for these latter days to bring the world his truth. And that feeling of religious superiority, I think, is one of the most enticing things about the Mormon church. I was special. I was saved. I was going to die and become a goddess and create my own universes with my God husband. Dan, and it's an important distinction too in the white supremacy, I guess, hierarchy is not all white supremacists, like you say, want to murder everybody. Because I certainly have conversations with people who are like, well, I have Mormon neighbors, and yes, they're racist, but they're not white supremacists like the skinheads or like Hitler was. White supremacy is white supremacy, and they may have different motivators and they may have different end games. So like Hitler, he truly just wanted everyone else annihilated. I've known, I still have people that were friends in my past who were Klan, who still are Klan, neo-Nazis, things like that. And some of them truly want to harm other people. Some white supremacists just want to regulate against their rights and make sure that, people who aren't white, the non-whites, are kept in their place.
So you actually have friends. Do you consider them friends, or are they ex-friends?
I haven't spoken to them anymore. Okay. But I should say everybody cut me off. They think I'm crazy, and that's ironic. But as a Mormon, like, I didn't want to hurt anybody, and I didn't necessarily want anyone destroyed. We were just trying to convert everybody so that they could be turned white, because the scriptures teach that even like the Native Americans, as they get baptized and join the Mormon church, that their skin will be white, that the curse will be lifted, and they will be redeemed. So Mormons are they're like the nice white supremacists. Yeah. They just want to convert everybody.
I know when I was a kid growing up in New York, and if you know New York City, you got Brooklyn and Queens on the western side of Long Island, and then you got the non-city parts of Long Island. And I was in a Cub Scout troop, a pack, I think it was called, and my mom was one of the den mothers. And I remember one of the kids who was in the Cub Scouts invited me and this other kid to a picnic one Saturday. So we get there, driving there with his father, and I see all of these people in white robes, and I'm thinking, these are men. They're wearing dresses. Were they bringing me to a gay revival? Then they pulled out the hoods. I said, oh, fuck. And I told my mother when I got home, I said, Mom, I just went and saw some Ku Klux Klansmen with so-and-so's father. And my mother blew her top. She drove over to the kid's house. She said if he ever did anything like that again, she would. I mean, she went. And my mom was not someone who was outgoing. She was very shy and introverted generally. But this set
That was
her
a
off
big deal.
like never before. Was there no one in your family or a neighbor who said, you know, don't take everything so seriously that the pastors or the ministers, whatever they're called, say, people are people. Were there any mediating influences when you were growing up?
That's a really good question. First of all, in that cult within a, like the cult without walls, where the walls are in my head, I'd also been taught that non-members, so it wasn't just Black people and Native Americans that were evil. It was also gay people. It was working moms. It was anybody who wasn't a Mormon. It was the woke feminists. It was Democrats. It was, like everybody, Chinese people, everybody. So I had a great fear and distrust of everybody. I wasn't really allowed to spend time at non-members' homes. I wasn't allowed to date boys who weren't Mormon. So my mom did her best to make sure that I was very much protected. And the Mormon church takes up so much of your life. We're at church all day on Sunday. Mm-hmm. We'd have ward potlucks and things on Saturdays. Friday nights, we had youth dances, 3 weekends a month. And then family home evening on Mondays. I went to seminary 5 days a week during high school. So the indoctrination process, it was an immersion program. I didn't just go to church on Sunday and learn this stuff. 7 days a week, we had family scripture study. Wednesday night, I had youth group. I had girls camp all throughout the summer. So I was immersed in Mormonism all the time. So I didn't have a lot of outside voices. Interestingly, the two outside voices that I didn't realize were what they were my dad and his mom. Now, my dad was a convert to the church. My mom was multi-generational Mormon, deeply indoctrinated. So she was absolutely the driving force in my childhood indoctrination and brainwashing, truly is what it was. But my dad had joined the church for a girlfriend who then broke up with him and met my mom just a few years after that. So my dad was a brand new convert to the church in the early 70s. And I would not realize this until I left the church 7 years ago. My dad told me this story. When my dad went through the temple for his wedding to my mom, he realized that the Mormon church was what it was. Back in those days, my dad actually had a promise that he would take his own life and rip his guts out and feed them to the birds of the air and the beasts of the field. He had to do all of these basically satanic ritual movements throughout the temple as part of his temple wedding. So romantic. So he left the temple, and he told me just 7 years ago that as he left the temple that day, he told my mom, Kathy, your church is a cult. And he was a non-believer throughout my childhood who was forced by my mom to attend church for 45 years. Mm. So my dad at times would be that voice of reason. We'd come home from church and he'd hear a lesson in church that he thought was harmful to the kids. And he'd just be like, that bishop is full of shit. And my mom would cry and say, well, you just don't understand. But his mom, my grandma, would come over for Christmas and Sunday dinner and birthdays and things like that. And she would kind of whisper to me sometimes little things like, Jenny, the Book of Mormon is fake, right? Mm. It's only Jesus. You just need the Bible. So, But I also just chalked that up to the fact, I had that feeling of superiority and supremacy. Grandma doesn't realize the truth. So I never doubted anything, and I certainly wouldn't have listened to anybody around me because I had been so thoroughly indoctrinated.
So I want to 2 more points, and then we'll move on to the more recent YouTube and the MAGA stuff with Trump. I know that people like Southern Baptists, Methodists, don't consider the Mormons even Christian, whereas they seem to me to be plainly a Christian denomination. Mm-hmm. Say pro or con of them what you will. Where are you now, though? Do you consider yourself a non-denominational Christian? Have you converted to another religion? Are you an agnostic, an atheist? Where are you now?
That's a really good question. Thanks for asking. I left the Mormon church in 2018, October of 2018, and the next week I was at a Christian church because it was just so shocking. I suddenly left the Mormon church, and in the days after that, I realized I still believe in Jesus. The Mormon church was keeping me from knowing the real Jesus. Now I'm going to dive into the Bible and just have that one-on-one relationship with my Lord and Savior. So I spent 4.5 years in non-denominational Christianity. And during that time period, I went to, Muslim mosques, and I went to Jewish synagogues. I meditated at a Buddhist temple. I studied everything. I studied Hinduism and Taoism and paganism and all kinds of stuff. Having been in the Mormon religion for my whole entire life and not really having the ability to even look at other worldviews, it was kind of therapeutic to study the precepts and just sit in those worship spaces with other people. So I definitely felt like my home was Christianity. So I believed very much in Jesus. I had a testimony of the Bible. And 4.5 years into Christianity, I dug into the Bible deep enough that I realized, no offense to those who believe, that it is something that I absolutely do not want in my life, don't want my children to read. I find its teachings inherently despicable from beginning to end. And I broke up with Jesus about 2.5 years ago, left the church altogether. And I do now strongly identify as an atheist, which to me just simply means there is absolutely zero evidence for a God. There could be one. We could die and there's a magic pink bunny that takes us home to her fluffy underbelly in the sky. There could be something that we certainly are not aware of, but there is zero evidence that there's a God, in my opinion. And I am also anti-theist, which is, to me, more important to what I do on a daily basis. With my platforms, I have 500,000 followers across my 2 platforms, and I reach just under 10 million people a month. I'm mostly talking about the harms of religion, working in organizations where we're actively working to mitigate some of the impact of religion, some secular organizations, etc., because there is a lot of evidence for the harm that religion does to people. And on the question of the Baptists and everybody saying that the Mormons aren't Christian, I agree. The Mormons aren't Christian. They don't represent the teachings of Yeshua, who I do believe was a historic figure. I think that there was a skinny little Jewish guy running around in ancient Palestine who the teachings of the Bible were maybe originally inspired by. But I also don't think that any Christian church is Christian, certainly not Baptist, certainly not fundamentalist Baptist, and some of the others that I've worshipped with and studied. There is not a church on the face of the earth today, not the Catholic Church, not the Lutherans, not anybody, who truly represents the teachings of Yeshua. So that's my take.
You anticipated my next follow-up, which was whether you believed in Jesus as a man, and my follow-up would be as a God. So you say that he's that. There's that famous picture now that. Not white Jesus, but real Jesus, as a real Semitic-looking guy, dark-skinned from however many centuries ago. So you believe there was a real basis for Jesus, whether he was called Jesus then or not, but you don't believe in the divinity of that preacher.
Yes. So to clarify, I do believe that at some point around the time span that he is attributed to have lived, that there was very likely a rabbi going around teaching his philosophy by the name of Yeshua, and that he very likely inspired the writings of the Bible several hundred years later, and the movement, the rebellion that erupted in Israel, which then led to a whole bunch of different things. I don't think that if he had never actually existed as a person, that the Dead Sea Scrolls and some of the other earlier writings would have happened. So I certainly think that there is a charismatic leader that had a fairly poignant and potentially life-changing philosophy that passed away at a very young age and could certainly have been crucified by the Romans. Not a lot of clarity on that, but I absolutely do not believe that he was God. And there's really no evidence for him, for the little bit that we know of the historical Jesus, really saying that he was God either. But we have the Bible and everything through the filter of churches and governments. So, that's something that we'll never really know. But if Jesus was alive today, I think that he would be horrified at the religion that has grown out of his name.
So my sister and her husband, my brother-in-law is an addictive personality. When they first met, he was drinking, then he got into drugs. He did a few petty crimes to pay for his drugs. He spent a year or two in a minimum security jail. He came out, and then he became a bodybuilder. So he in his youth, sort of just switched addictions, whether it was alcohol, whether it was drugs, whether it was, I don't know if he used PEDs or whatever to bulk up. The last 20 or so years, he's been clean. He and my wife, my sister, his wife, are doing well and all. I'm wondering, because you came from that Mormon background, because you're now, you talk about Christianity, then you were involved with the MAGA politics. Do you consider yourself an addictive personality, and do you fear that at some point in the future there might be another thing that woos you?
No, because there's no data that suggests that people with addictive personalities are more susceptible to cults than others. There's a variety of reasons, and just as a little bit of foundational understanding into who I am, I share my story, which doesn't take a lot of expertise to just tell your own story on social medias. But I've also had 7 years of in-depth investigation, education, and working with some of the top respected researchers, scientists, anthropologists, psychologists, etc., around cults and high control groups. So I come with probably a level of expertise in cults that very few people have. And there is no evidence that shows that just because somebody has an addictive personality, that they're the people that are going to get trapped in a cult. You can have a non-addictive personality. And, I guess we should define that too. What makes somebody have an addictive personality? It can just be habit. It can be that they were raised in a family where that was just something that was role modeled early in life. And so they build neurons around these addictive tendencies. Of course, there can be many psychological problems, from mental health disorders, brain injuries, etc., that can lead to people having repeat experiences with different addictions. So that addictive personality is somewhat problematic because there's so many reasons why that can happen. But let's just accept that as something that we're going to talk about as addictive personalities. You can have an addictive personality and never be susceptible to a cult. And if you are a completely mentally healthy, non-addiction susceptible individual, but say your husband just died and left you a widow at age 22, and somebody comes along and tells you that you can be with him in heaven forever, you're going to do everything that you can to be with your husband again forever. If you don't have a family, if maybe you're struggling financially, if you've been in jail and somebody comes along and says, I can assuage that guilt by helping Jesus forgive you, then you're going to join that. The danger of high demand religions, the danger of religion in general, and especially things like the Mormon church, is that they're not playing on the worst in humanity. They're not playing on addictive tendencies. They are playing on our very survival instincts. Our fear of death, our desire to be with our family and protect our family, our desire to protect ourselves, our purpose-driven lives. That's something that's really inherent in the human animal, that we want to have purpose and leave the world a little bit better than we found it. And that's what makes them so dangerous. If they were only alluring to people who are addictive, then nobody would join cults. But they're addictive to almost all mankind.
Okay.
So I am not specifically more susceptible to joining a cult again now that I've had therapy, now that I have understanding about those things that were programmed into me in childhood. It's very difficult to get me to jump on board with anything at this point. So, but that's taken a lot of work. People are very likely to jump out of a cult into another cult, even if that's just the cult of one, where you have a boyfriend that's now going to control you and tell you what to do and what underwear to wear. It certainly does take a lot of awareness and a lot of therapy to break out of any behavioral models, especially if you've had that since childhood.
So, Jennie, let's talk a bit about Trump. I want to just give you a sense of my family's political background and see if there's any resonances with yours. My dad was a working class guy. He came from a very liberal German background. People think Germans, they must have all been Nazis. No, there were a lot of socialists. There were a lot of, people from Europe that were that way. My dad was a trade unionist. He when I grew up as a kid, the Vietnam War. My dad hated LBJ because of the war. He hated Nixon even more. And my dad died in '83, and he had basically given up on politics. I voted in '84, my first presidential election, and I voted for Mondale, and then I voted for Dukakis and Clinton the first time. By the second time, I was like, fuck Clinton. I voted Nader. Then I voted twice for Obama because I thought, well, finally we got a black guy who might do something for. I, I, really think of those as two of my biggest mistakes politically. Yes, I would take Obama over Reagan or the Bushes, but by the same token, he was a neoliberal. He doesn't care about anyone but himself. I mean, look at his bank account. Then we got Trump, who from New York. Everyone I know, there's a reason Trump lost New York 3 straight elections. Everyone knows what a con artist he and his dad were. And then Joe Biden, I couldn't stand Joe Biden either. This is the 3 strikes guy. Let's throw all brown people in jail. My personal take is through history, every U.S. president has been a mass murderer. Every U.S. president. And maybe the one guy, William Henry Harrison, who died, but even he was a general. He died after 30 days. And so in your growing up, was there any, what was the thing? Is like, Tricky Dicky. Well, that's probably too old for you. But
I was actually born the day after Richard Nixon resigned, so
okay.
I missed him by 24 hours.
So what was your both your
Jimmy
parents?
Carter.
Jimmy Carter. Okay.
Yeah, so my dad was an anchorman on the evening news when I was a child, and my uncles were all attorneys, and my granddad was a college professor. So I'm the oldest granddaughter. I was the only grandchild for a while in this family of really big personalities who were really in tune with world events. So, when I was 4 or 5 years old, I had to sit down at the dinner table and be able to answer when somebody asked me what I thought about what was going on with the Iran-Contra scandal or, whatever world event was going on. My family was very, very tuned into politics, and my family is also very LDS, with the exception of my dad, who, of course, was a covert non-believer. But the Mormon Church has some really specific teachings around God being behind the church. Again, that's another teaching in the Book of Mormon, that as long as the members of the church are righteous and the church is here in America, that America is led by God. So I believed that when a president was elected, that just the fact that he had been elected kind of showed that he had God's stamp of approval, whether that was a Democrat or a Republican or not. Of course, I always wanted the Republican to win because the Democrats were baby killers who wanted gay people to get married, right? So I only wanted the Republicans because they didn't kill babies. They just killed everybody else in the world with their massive army, and that was fine because God was violent anyway, and he was only killing evildoers. I love Jimmy Carter. This is funny. He was actually my first love. Like, I would watch the news at night because my dad was anchorman. So I would literally watch my dad on TV, Northern Arizona. And there was just something about his Southern accent. Jimmy Carter, when I was like kindergarten, first grade, he was the sexiest man I'd ever seen. Ronald Reagan comes along. He's this Hollywood actor. I am uninformed. I am Mormon. I believe that it goes like this: Heavenly Father, the prophet, and then the president. And the president is God's anointed over God's land, America. I was a Christian nationalist, right? And the prophet is God's anointed over the church. So those two were like the most sacred callings on earth. So, I always was just in awe at the power of God working in America and how that he was bringing to pass all of his righteous endeavors.
But if you were a white nationalist at the time Obama was president, there must have been some schism in your mind.
So I actually voted for Obama, which is the only time that I ever jumped off of the Republican platform. And I voted for him because he just demonstrated so much kindness and compassion that, to me, it's like, this is somebody who represents Christ. He represents what I think God would want for this nation more than anybody else. And he was black, but he was also half white. So to me, it's like, well, he's half white. Once he got into office, I did regret having voted for him because he did push a Black agenda more than I had hoped he would, because I was
What is
racist
that
and white
agenda?
supremacist.
Because I'm from the opposite side. I think he totally abandoned liberalism and progressivism. He didn't even sign what was called card check for unions for people to join unions. To me, he was just a lazy. He was great talker, lazy. But I think Martin Luther King Jr., for example, would probably have been shaking his head after Obama's 2 terms.
I read his book Dreams of My Father
Mm.
after I had voted for him and after he was in office. And I guess in that book, because I was a white supremacist little racist girl, right? In that book, I was just disappointed that he was showing so much concern for just Black people and not for all Americans. I felt like in that book that he didn't include me. He didn't include my family. He was so focused on Blacks, and I was too stupid, too naive, too racist, too religiously indoctrinated to realize that somebody needed to go to bat for the American Blacks. So
then Trump comes along, and I have to say I'm someone. Maybe it's because where I grew up, I was able to spot a con artist. I could never understand why anyone would have fallen for Ronald Reagan, and Donald Trump. I mean, to me, he's so obviously a phony. Even if I hadn't grown up in New York City and knew all about his family and their dealings with the mafia, and I've always found it interesting how people talk about Trump and his racism and white nationalism, but he was making him and his daddy were making deals with the mafia. This is the Goodfellas people. These are people who will kill you because you owe them $2.37. You know what?
right? I mean, I think that this is why everybody follows Trump, right? Like you look at Charlie Kirk, you look at Erica Kirk, you look at Caroline Levitt, the little White
Yeah.
House spokesperson. You look at Marjorie Taylor Greene and all of the people that have been friends with Trump that are his huge supporters, and just the hordes of people that are at all of the MAGA rallies. They are magical thinkers, all of them, 100% of them. I believed that there were golden plates that were hidden in a hill that would restore the fullness of the gospel that a 14-year-old boy was shown by an angel. I believed that when I died that I would become a goddess and that I would literally give birth to billions of babies and create my own universe with my God husband. I believed that my Mormon garments would protect me from dying even if I was in a plane crash. If I was in a plane crash and I was faithful and I was wearing my Mormon garments, that I would somehow miraculously survive that plane crash. I had been indoctrinated my whole entire childhood to snuff out critical thinking, to stop all of my thoughts, and that was reinforced every single day through this religious immersion program. And even as an adult, that religious immersion program continued. It was also reinforced by my larger community. Like, it's one thing if you believe something crazy, but you live in a Mormon country club neighborhood in East Mesa, Arizona, where 50% of your neighbors are LDS, and they're all like, yeah, I can't wait until I die and become a goddess. And yeah, I always wear my garments in case I'm ever in a car crash or plane crash or anything. When that's reinforced by other people, then you look at the one guy who's like, your Mormon garments are never going to save you in a plane crash, and you think that he's the crazy one. So what Donald Trump did, he didn't invent MAGA. MAGA was a merger. MAGA was a merger of all of the Christian nationalists, all of the white supremacists, all of the magic thinking, like the really out there Christian religions and fringe groups like Turning Point USA, which isn't a religion, but it should be. He merged all of those. And it's funny because it's the first time in history that the Mormons and the fundamentalist Baptists and the evangelicals and everybody else has ever come together under one umbrella. And that started happening at Trump rallies because he was telling everybody the same thing. So for me, I already believed in magic thinking. So when Donald Trump stood up, like I can literally remember, Dan, standing in my living room coming up to the 2016 election. I wanted Mitt Romney because Mitt Romney was Mormon, so he was God's prophet. And then he lost. So it's like, well, who's the next anointed? Who's the one that I should vote for? Donald Trump acted just like all of the Mormon people in my community who were backstabbing, shady, embezzling business people. Again, I lived in multi-million-dollar homes in country club neighborhoods where everybody was Donald Trump in a suit and tie that went to church on Sundays. I mean, Donald Trump is no worse than any average Mormon that I've ever known. So I can remember standing in my living room watching, I don't even know what it was. I don't know if it was a convention or a rally or something, but the first time that I ever heard Donald Trump stand at the podium and say, "I'm going to make America great again." And I literally cried because I pictured the time when women stayed home and didn't work. I pictured a time when gay people weren't allowed to get married. I pictured a time when people weren't having sex out of wedlock and there weren't abortions and the world made sense. And that resonated with me so much. And I absolutely believed that he could do it. And I believe that he was called to do just that.
It's interesting you use the term magical thinking because I agree with you, and I think supernaturalism, the belief in the supernatural, whether it's gods, whether you think Bigfoot, whether you think Area 51 aliens who come and poke and prod your genitals,
Or the
whatnot.
law of attraction,
Yeah,
paganism. There's
yeah.
so much supernatural thinking.
But I can see how people can believe that if they believe someone, have a belief in someone. I believe my mom and dad were good people and would never lie to me. And they never did in anything big in a sense, except when they talked about Santa Claus and Christmas and stuff. And I remember, because I told you how I earlier had argued with my own pastor about Jesus and things there. But the pastor wasn't my mom and dad. When my mom and dad said that Santa Claus would come and bring me a toy and come down the chimney, I remember arguing with a kid the next day saying, "You mean to tell me that my parents would get up in the middle of the night and leave a toy for me, rather than Santa Claus come zip around the planet, and go down chimneys?" Because they wouldn't lie to me. And so I think one of the major problems, and this goes to MAGA, this goes to Mormonism, this goes to a whole host of things, sexual abuse, this goes to power dynamics in the workplace, is people have this idea of a magical thinking. They think they are exceptional. They are told they are exceptional because of A, B, C, D, or whatever. And this makes anyone, not me, not you, not us, it makes them by definition in fear. Oh, yeah, we can crush them like bugs. They don't feel. It's like, do you agree that magical thinking is really the ill that you're sort of dancing around here?
Yes, 100%. And I wish that more people would dialogue about this, because when we talk about MAGA, when we talk about Trump, when we talk about this Christian nationalist phenomenon that's going on with America, and it's bigger than Trump, because Turning Point USA, now led by Erica Kirk, is going across American campuses and spreading like wildfire. There are pastors now who are more political than they are religious in their sermons on Sundays. So this movement of Christian nationalism is a monster. It's a beast. It's changing America. And everybody, they kind of analyze it from just a political vantage point, or maybe a sociological vantage point. Sometimes economics ties into the discussion. Nobody is just digging into just the basics of what makes people believe something, and it's magical thinking. Only cult survivors like myself. I have a friend, a creator friend called Knitting Cult Lady, Daniela. She's former Army. Only people like us who've been involved in cults and survived them and studied them understand that the explanation is so much more simple than what anybody's talking about. It's just simple magical thinking. I believed that when I got baptized, that all my sins were washed away. I believed that when I paid tithing, that was an insurance policy against anything bad ever happening to me, that if I said prayers in the mornings, that my kids wouldn't be hurt on the way to school. I believed that if our nation had faith in God and elected a leader who prayed and put his faith in God, that America would be protected from war and from harm, and that we would flourish, that we would thrive. I also believe Mormonism is very much a prosperity gospel. So I believed that if we elected somebody evil who wanted to murder babies and let gay people get married and trans kids go to the bathroom and whatever, that we would be cursed. The Mormon Church has a document that I encourage everyone to just Google and read. It's called The Family, A Proclamation to the World. This was published in 1995 by the Mormon prophet himself. It's supposed to have come straight out of the mouth of God. And this document says that if the family crumbles, if women leave the home and they aren't stay-at-home moms anymore, and the dads stop providing, if families break up, homosexuality, things like that, that catastrophes and plagues and scourges will be poured out across the United States and then the world. So I believed in magic.
Yeah, I think one of the issues with the country is not so much that we're going to make it great again, or that we're going here or there. Well, to me, it's a lack of critical thinking too, because you don't.
Yes.
Magical thinking is filling a void, and I see it now. I don't know how much you are up on artificial intelligence, but what we have now with these LLMs, these large language models, that ChatGPT, that's not actual artificial intelligence. Yet, if you hear the advertising people from Madison Avenue talking about it, you think that we're on the verge of becoming gods ourselves, and we're gonna. The minute we get to super artificial intelligence, we're going to head out to the stars and conquer the universe and whatnot. And to me, this is like kids reading comic books about Superman and other superheroes. It's so detached from reality. Why do you think?
We like to detach from reality. Sorry, go ahead.
That's certainly true. But why do you think that we have such a deficit of critical thinking here? Even aside from religion, aside from politics, people, whenever they encounter something, they don't go for what's the most likely or simplest explanation, what's called Occam's razor. They always have to confabulate things into something more than there is. Is it something that's missing in the human soul, do you think, or what?
I don't think it's missing the human soul. I just think that we have these beautiful survival instincts that have worked because our species is still here, and we have been for a very long time. I mean, that's really simple. We have these two instincts where we like to avoid death. We have a fear of death. We have a fear of suffering. Those serve us really well in the wild, right? Because we're not going to go like eat a poisoned mushroom that somebody else in our tribe ate yesterday and we saw them suffer. We're going to avoid suffering. We're going to avoid things that are harmful. An amazing survival instinct. When we developed our big brains and communication and deep connection and compassion for other humans, we developed a fear of death. And religion and magical thinking answers both of those. My grandma died. I didn't really have to mourn that. I knew that, decades down the road, I would die too. We were going to live together in the celestial kingdom. So that magical thinking kept me from having to combat that fear of death. When I became a mom and I had 4 biological children and 1 adopted child, I had so much fear over something happening to my kids because my first baby had an injury at 18 months old that was life-threatening. And I always had this terror of what if something happens to one of my kids? And so I went to the Mormon temple once a week. We went through a temple session, my ex-husband and I, because in the temple they taught about eternal life. They taught about families being together forever. And that little hit every week of 2 hours in the temple, I could go home and for the next 7 days, no matter what happened to my babies, I knew that they were going to be with me. That assuaged my fear of death. And then that fear of suffering, like, life is so precarious, right? Like, you could walk out the door tomorrow and be in a car accident. There's so many things that happen. And our magical thinking, if we think somebody's in charge and they're doing this work, if I say my prayers, if I wear my cross, Jesus is going to protect me. Or, it can be a political thing too. If we have Donald Trump in charge, the economy is going to go great and my retirement account is going to flourish and that's going to minimize my suffering. We don't even think about it. It's not a conscious thought. This isn't filtered through our frontal lobe or anything. It is so primal. We are just doing everything that our brain thinks is necessary to avoid suffering. When the fact of the matter is that a little bit of suffering is usually what leads to a better outcome. Sometimes that suffering is the form of work. So Donald Trump, for me, I didn't have to work hard and change anything and do anything. Donald Trump came along and said, hey, I'm going to make America great again. I didn't have to suffer. I didn't have to live in fear. Uh, we like those guys that come along and say, I can take, I got you, babe. The Prince Charming, right? I've got all this.
So let's talk about where you are politically now. We know where you stand in the religious aspect. When people ask me why Trump got his foothold, I say that I describe the two major parties that the Republicans stand for evil, but they stand for something. The Democrats, the modern Democrats, don't stand for anything. And given a choice between something or nothing, people will take a bad something over nothing.
Yes.
And you don't see the Hakeem Jeffrieses. They're not going to make Chuck Schumer. I can't stand Nancy Green Dream Pelosi. The scorn, the condescension she has for even her own side and young people and the future for her
She's
own
so
grandkids.
mean.
Yeah, and so to me, that seems to be the explanation for me, the likeliest explanation as to why you had people vote for Trump that otherwise would have voted for progressive politics. I'll give you an example. A fellow I work with recently, he voted for Trump. His wife voted for the Democrat Kamala Harris. But they were both metalheads. They're 50-year-old people who still go to metal concerts and whatnot from bands from the 80s. And now they've recently split up. And even though he voted for Trump, now he's dating a black woman where we work with. So not all of these people who voted for Trump are dyed-in-the-wool racists. A lot of them are just people who, flip a coin.
The thing that Trump did that was such a genius is that he posed as just a working class guy. He puts on that little baseball cap. He goes out to these rallies. He eats McDonald's. It was the first time that we had a politician in a very long time that seemed like one of us. And so for everyone who wasn't religiously motivated, for the non-Christian nationalists and non-white supremacists who, maybe haven't gone to church their whole lives, but they still voted for Trump, he just seemed like a regular guy. So where are my politics right now? First of all, I see politics in America as the greatest form of class warfare that we have currently going on. And it's not what America was founded on. I mean, I have literal ancestors that I am descended from who fought and died so that America could be free. I love what Lincoln says at Gettysburg, that America should have a government that is of the people, by the people, and for the people. And that's what America was all about. We didn't want to be represented by the crown. We were tired of crazy King George. Our founding fathers had a dream of an educated white, but I mean, they were close. They were getting there. There were definitely some fine tunings that needed to be done in our Constitution and Bill of Rights and other founding documents. But they had a vision of a representative government. The America that we have today is in no way a representative government at all. I did a recent video on my YouTube where I talked about leaving MAGA 2 years ago. I had deconstructed my religion, left Christianity, was fully comfortable, resonating beautifully in atheism, and people call me a woke feminist, and I wear that proudly. So then I had to deconstruct as we came into this campaign where I stood politically. And just watching a couple of MAGA rallies, I realized I'm no longer that hateful, judgmental white supremacist Christian nationalist that I was. And MAGA in no way represents me. And Trump is a scumbag. So just a little ways into the campaign, I realized I'm no longer MAGA. I got at my computer one day and I looked at the Democratic platform and everything that they stand for versus Republicans and how they typically vote. And I realized I, on paper, fall squarely into the Democratic realm. I don't support anything that the Republicans stand for. And then I got out there and just kind of looked at, who's my senator? And what's the governor in Arizona doing? And then what are some of the other possible political candidates? And when Joe Biden was the one running, I had depression, and I started looking into moving to Finland and what it would take for an American to relocate, because I just decided to jump ship altogether. The article that I wrote just simply says that they're all sitting down in the country clubs together and that they're all the same. It doesn't matter if they're Democrat or Republican. What's happening in our politics is class warfare. The elitists, the wealthy, the Ivy League university graduates are the ones who are running everything.
Yeah.
It's very difficult. I actually volunteer right now for Chris Volpe. He's running for J.D. Vance's Senate seat in Ohio. He is a young, successful business person, not too young. He's in his 40s. He's an incredible human being. He has incredible policies. He has a background in healthcare, and he could do amazing things for Ohio. The Ohio Democratic Party won't even return his emails. After he had announced his candidacy, they resurrected 72, 73, I don't know how old he is, 74-year-old Sherrod Brown, who lost last time, put him back on the ticket to oppose Chris Volpe, and literally has not acknowledged, and this is systematically across the board, the establishment Democrats do not want to lose their power. And sometimes I used to say that the Democrats and the Republicans are just one degree of separation from one another. It's really just gay marriage and abortion. That's the only thing that separates. So maybe that's 2 degrees, but they're really not. The Democrats, as we have them right now, and the Republicans are almost identical.
So why? So
and they're all rich people who are self-interested.
So let me just ask you then: have you looked into third parties? Because I actually in 2020 did interviews with 5 or 6 third-party members. You want to see the funniest video though? Look at the Prohibition Party guy. I think he was on drugs, but the thing that, and this is the problem is, I if I was living in Europe, I'd be a Green Party guy. I mean, and there you can actually win, an MP position or whatnot. I would be a Green Party. To me, the Democrats are right wing and the Republicans are full on fascist. Have you looked into that? Because I've always said, yes, they're not going to win, but at least I don't have the blood on my hands kind of thing. But it's very frustrating because they don't seem to know how to win. The system is so stacked against them. What is your take on third parties?
I work with a massive coalition of rebels like myself across America who reach more millions of people in a month than any politician or the Democratic Party itself. And I went through the whole gamut, right? So I'm gonna move to Finland. I'm gonna move to Mexico. Where else can I go? What about Italy? Is Italy taking Americans right now? And I was researching how to immigrate. And then it's like, well, I'm gonna stay here and I'm going to fight. So I am currently working to rebuild the entire Democratic Party the way that the people of America want it built. Because at the end of the day, the old cronies, the Democratic oligarchs and all of their lobbyists, they're all dying off at rapid rates. They're not going to last the next 20 years. Most of them are past their 70s. The younger generation of Democrats just needs direction, and there are some incredible leaders that are standing up and stepping into that
Do you know the Tallarico guy from Texas, James Tallarico? What do you think of him?
I haven't studied enough about his platform. I was really excited about Mamdani. I just think that his campaign was incredible. I think that he is exactly what our founding fathers envisioned for America. He is somebody who's going to look at the problem, who's going to come in and listen to the people and give the solutions that the working class, the regular old people of America want, because we talk all the time about no kings, right? There's that whole no kings march that did absolutely nothing but make people feel good about getting out on the streets and making a sign. The real issue is serfs. In America, we are supposed to be free from oppression. Our government is supposed to represent the people so that the working class and the commoners have the ability to have that life, the pursuit of happiness, life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. And whether we have a monarchy or a tyranny or what, the way that our economic and social system, those socioeconomics, are preventing everyday people like us from having all of those things that we need to flourish in life. And at this point, we need to push all of them out, Democrat, Republican, etc. So I'm working today. I love some of the third parties, but the way that our voting system is structured, they will never win. Our priority right now should be support those young, fresh leaders who have a vision for the America that you want. Support them. Like, I live in Arizona. I am the social media consultant for Chris Volpe in Ohio running for J.D. Vance's Senate seat. Why I'm doing that is that Chris Volpe being in that Senate seat in Washington, D.C. impacts me almost as much as my Congress people here. Adelita Grojalva she's my congresswoman. So it's important for us right now to get control of the Democratic Party and build it into the representative of the people that it should be. Honestly, they don't have a vision, and that's partly on us, because all of us...
Right, it's the voters' fault, ultimately. It's the voters' fault, ultimately.
It's the voters' fault.
See, my fear is, if you look back at what I call the teabaggers from 15 years ago, they were basically proto-MAGA, but they didn't have Trump as the leader. When Trump dies, with maybe a few months I don't think he's going to make it through this term. He's really going downhill.
I don't know,
but
I think he's going to live a long time.
Yeah, but regardless,
He's
his power is going to wane. But we can't fall back to the default of neoliberalism, because neoliberalism is the loam from which MAGA and the teabaggers and Obamaism that it's so devoid. It's structurally against everything you were just speaking about a couple of moments ago. And if we go from Trumpism falling back into neoliberal ways, well, guess what's going to happen? In 2035, in 2045, there's going to be a third wave from teabaggers to MAGA to something else, and this person is going to be a lot smarter than Trump and a lot more competent than Trump, because they're going to learn from it. And the way that you kill off that strain, and we can talk going all the way back to not punishing the Confederacy, but is you've got to break their back once and for all.
So I do disagree a little bit with that line of historical argument.
Okay.
I don't think that we should have punished the Confederacy. I think that Lincoln should have let the South go, because the Northern United States and the Southern United States are incongruous, and we will never, ever, ever be okay. I actually support a Brexit where anything below, that whole Mason-Dixon line, everything that would have been Confederacy, and the northern states actually separate, and we have two completely separate governments. We have the Southern United States, and they can be all of the MAGA people, and we have the Northern United States. Because 10 years from now, 30 years from now, 200 years from now, I do not ever want to be ruled by a bigoted, small-minded, fascist man who wants women to stay at home, who thinks that, who is fine with treating illegals and brown-skinned people in the way that he does. I never want that. And my MAGA friends, my former MAGA friends who never speak to me anymore, they certainly don't want a woke feminist atheist like myself in charge of them. America, from the beginning, was extremely culturally diverse. And I think that Abraham Lincoln made a grave mistake by pulling the back in. And he did that for selfish. It wasn't to free the slaves. It wasn't because he was this big magnanimous human. It was because the South was the bread bowl. It was the engine that kept all of America running and fed. And he needed the southern states. He needed the resources. He needed the harbors. And I think that was a grave mistake. So I think that our path forward at some point ends in maybe a velvet revolution. I call mine the Denman Revolution, and a splitting so that we can then have separate policies. And certainly if I live in a state that ends up in the southern United States, then I have the freedom to move elsewhere where trans people can be in the bathrooms and abortion is legal and women have rights. There may absolutely be some redistribution of American population, but
well, yeah. So let's. Again, we're going to disagree slightly on some of those things, but let's talk about YouTube itself, because if we're talking about a lack of critical thinking, my website Cosmoetica.com, I wrote about 1,300 out of 1,800 essays for about 15 years, and it did wonderful in terms of. You couldn't make money on blogs. Back in the 20 years ago, blogs was supposed to be the big thing. Now everyone's got a YouTube channel or a TikTok or something. And it seems to me that, people are even less literate now than they were 20 years ago. And it's because everything is I mean, we're having an intelligent discussion here. But someone might not like me from the arts, someone might not like you from politics or whatever, but people having a discussion. And I don't know if in 50, 60 years, if the AI does come online and assuming they don't go all Terminator on us, that people are still going to be doing this. It concerns me because to me, there's nothing more creative and involving than reading a great book. If you read Moby Dick, I don't know if you had, if you haven't read it,
Yes, I did.
you're not
It's
reading
a
it because
long, hard read.
you're not reading it because of the whale. You're reading it for the people, the diversity. This talk what you're talking about earlier about the diversity of America from the beginning. The Pequot represented America, and I don't know if that's still there. Now you have your YouTube channel and you're talking about things in a literate manner, but I do know that you had some earlier channels where you called yourself a trad wife, which is a term I only heard in the last 6 months. You had, I guess, your trad wife channel, and then you had a channel on cooking or healthy eating or something. How many channels are there that you have, and have some of them gone by the wayside as you have turned away from your earlier youthful positions?
Oh yes, absolutely. So, and when I was doing my Green Living, I was Dear Mrs. Green. When I was doing my Green Living, homesteading Mormon influencer era, there was no social media. So that was an actual website that we paid like tens of thousands of dollars to build, and we did videos and things like that. So that wasn't social media. We had a business that was run via that, and I had a blog and a podcast and some different things within that. And yeah, those have certainly gone by the wayside years ago. I think that I started my Dear Mrs. Green, 15 years ago now. So, and I had quite a following of people that loved learning my recipes and learning all of my little Mormon stay-at-home mom
And
tips
did
and
you
things like
experience? Because
that.
I
So,
experienced this with Cosmoetica. People say they don't understand why Cosmoetica was popular, and my videos aren't. I say it's the same thing. It's the difference between silent film and film with sound, or from radio to TV. People will not make that jump. They're going to stick with that one media or that one place where they first found you, and they won't follow you. I found that. Have you found that? That have people
I don't
followed you?
know. So people follow me everywhere,
Yeah.
but there aren't a lot
Well,
of
you're prettier
women in
than
the
me.
world who come from. Well, but it's also like I was a Mormon homesteading trad wife, and with an abusive husband who cheated on me with 100 different plus women over the course of 24 years. So I just think that I have a unique experience. Even when I do interviews, like I just did a Vanity Fair interview last week, and Vanity Fair had interviewed like 5 other former trad wives, and she's like, your story takes the cake for everything. So I've had a unique life experience, and I don't know, that makes me stand out. So people follow me on Substack, they follow my blogs, they follow everything I do. I have stalkers in real life. So I don't know. I think that sometimes if you have that unique theme, and sometimes the number of people that watch me and follow me, just even like in real life, like all of my neighbors always want to know like what's the next thing that I'm doing, and my little nonprofit and things. Sometimes I think that is because there's a lack of female voices. There aren't a lot of women who've lived the life that I've lived, who are brave enough or crazy enough to talk about their ex-husband and talk about the things that they went through. I just pinned a video to my TikTok today. I have my 400,000 followers over on my TikTok. I just pinned a video where I talk about STDs. I talk about the fact that I thought I had a yeast infection for a year and a half, and the doctor kept giving me medicine and it never went away. And then I found out that my husband had been having unprotected sex with prostitutes, and he had given me 5 STDs that I had to be treated for. And I'm this little sheltered Mormon mom that I had never even heard of these STDs. I didn't even know what they were. And every year when I went in for my medical physical with my doctor, I always just rejected that STD panel, because it's like, honey, I am a married Mormon temple worker mommy. Like, I didn't want my insurance company to waste money on an STD panel. And when I found out about my husband's 24-year double life, one of the first things my doctor had said was always get the STD panel, because you would have known years ago what was going on. So, you know, not a lot of women are bold enough to do a video where they talk about sexually transmitted diseases. women's voices, I think, are definitely in demand. And so, yeah. So if you're a woman listening and you have a story to tell where you have gotten out of a terrible relationship into the other side and you can offer other women some hope and some insight, certainly share that story.
So let's turn the mirror around here. We've been talking basically about your past and whatnot. So you have a channel that, from what I can tell, averages anywhere from a minimum of a few tens of thousands of views per video to several 100,000 views. I don't think you've cracked 1 million yet, from what I looked at, but that's probably
I
only
think on my YouTube I have a couple that have cracked 1 million.
Oh,
But
okay.
yeah, I've only been on YouTube for a year now, so I'm new to YouTube.
Yeah.
I've been over on TikTok for 7 years.
Oh, okay.
So
So what do you want to be doing 5, 10 years from now? Will the YouTube thing be a moneymaker for you? Do you look at yourself and say, yeah, but do you think maybe you'll even run for a local position in your home state?
oh, I love this question. Dan, nobody ever asks me what I want to be doing. They always just ask me what I used to be doing.
Yeah.
I will certainly always do YouTube and I will certainly always do TikTok because that's where I keep my finger on the pulse of other women. You know, I wake up every morning to DMs from women who are going through tough times with their relationship or just looking for, a shoulder to cry on or a little bit of inspiration or a little bit of advice. And social media gives that to me in spades. So I will certainly always keep my social media. I will always have stories to tell and things that I want to report on. But I'm currently working on my documentary, which I think will be up on Netflix here next year. I'm working with an Emmy nominated producer, Artisha Mann Cooper. She's incredible. So we are working on my multi-series documentary and then the movie to come after that. I'm finishing up my book because I think that the story of what I went through in life has application for so many people, not just me. I've met all over the world who've been in toxic relationships, who've been stuck in religious institutions that they couldn't get out of. So it's not just an abused wife story. My story, very unique and very tragic, has, I think, resonance with a lot of people and some lessons that people can learn. So I'm in the process of almost finishing up my personal autobiography. I also have a couple of other books in the works. And right now, what I'm doing politically is working on different action groups. I work with a secular group to help protect Arizona from religious overreach. I volunteer currently with Chris Volpe, of course, who's running for J.D. Vance's seat. I also do just a little bit of volunteer work for some other politicians who need advice on social media, marketing, different things like that. Those services are all free. I'm not making any money off of those. I've also branched into, I have a thriving local Arizona social media management company that's a part-time gig for me right now. And working with a nonprofit as a spokesperson for domestic violence survivors. So what I hope to be doing in the future, let's say 5 years from now, is raising grandbabies and making sure that in every way that I possibly can, my grandson is about to turn 5 this year, making sure that I am doing everything that I can to safeguard their future in any way possible. Not a lot of my followers know this, but I am a high-functioning disabled woman. I have an anoxic brain injury from my suicide attempt during my divorce and leaving the Mormon church that makes it difficult for me to commit all the time to traveling and things like that. We were away for the weekend and the traveling was really hard on me. If at some point in the future I don't struggle with some of my physical limitations as my doctors work on the treatments and getting me back completely on my feet, I would love to run for office. I would love to work as an advisor. I would love to work on a political campaign. I would even go back to college and do my political science and, I don't know, constitutional law, whatever I need to do to make sure that I have that background in that. But yeah, I would absolutely love to get into politics in some format.
It's interesting. I was just thinking as you were talking about your various things that you've experienced. There's the quote by, I don't know if you know Jean-Paul Sartre, the French philosopher. He wrote a play called
Yeah.
No Exit, and basically it's about three people stuck in hell, but it's just boring as hell. Hell is just eternal boredom, and the most famous line from that is that hell is other people, and it seems to me that so much of what is noxious in life isn't the natural disasters. Yes, hurricanes and volcanoes and floods are terrible. Here in Texas, we had 100+ people die on the 4th of July because of a
I
flood,
know that was so
and it
heartbreaking.
was so unnecessary. It was totally
Hmm.
unnecessary. But regardless, most of the stuff though in life, whether it's an asshole boss that you have that just won't get off your back or something, whether it's a cheating spouse, whether it's a neighbor who wants to keep that bush there, won't let you pull up the bush because it's sentimental to them or something. Most of the stuff that sends people into these apoplexies and ends up with a high blood pressure is caused by other people, and it seems to me that that's just so unnecessary, and so much. Imagine the time that is wasted that could be put to more good use if we had a little bit more of an IQ as a species.
Humans are terrifying, aren't we? But we also have the potential for so much beauty.
That's true. And art. And if you ever decide you want to interview anyone on the arts, make me your first contact person, because I'd love to talk to you again about something a little bit cheerier than Donald Trump and the Mormons.
Oh, so fun. That's actually how I celebrated Thanksgiving because I don't acknowledge American Thanksgiving.
Mhm.
And I've been disowned by my Mormon family. So it was just Kevin and I alone. We went away for a sabbatical. We went up to Scottsdale for the week. And the art museum was closed on Thursday. So I celebrate that as another Indigenous Peoples Day. And on Friday, I celebrated Thanksgiving in the Native American portion of the Phoenix Art Museum, which was absolutely spectacular. And I actually have a Substack that I'll send over to you that I'm writing on the power of art.
Well, like I said, if you ever need anyone to do that, give me a call. I can be your wingman.
Ooh, 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 ooh.
uh,
Like that would be really fun. Let's talk off camera about how I can interview you for art. I think that on the topic of art and politics and where those two things intersect, did you know that a lot of what pushed Mom Donnie in the beginning in New York was his wife Rama's artwork?
yeah, and
And have you
his
had a
mother's
chance to see
his
any of
mother is a
it?
filmmaker.
His mother's a filmmaker, so she's this incredible cinematographer, but um, his wife's art is so spectacular, the way that she sketches out just everyday life and
Mm.
simple people and brings so much beauty to humanity. So,
Well, just so people know, Life Take Two is Jenny's YouTube channel, main YouTube channel, I guess we can
mhm.
call it. And you can go there, visit there to find out more about it. So thank you for spending about 90 minutes talking, Jenny.
Yeah, thank you so much.